Arizona Territory, 1885. A brutal raid leaves a wagon train destroyed, with nearly 30 settlers dead. Hidden beneath an overturned wagon, Sarah Mitchell and her 4 young daughters cling to each other in terrified silence. Through a crack in the splintered wood, Sarah locks eyes with a lone Navajo warrior, observing the massacre from a distant ridge. He sees her, their fates connecting in that single, heart-stopping moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As night falls and the attackers retreat, Sarah expects him to reveal their hiding place or complete the slaughter himself. Instead, he makes a decision that will forever alter both their lives, a choice born from his own tragic past that Sarah could never have imagined. Chesapeake Bay, Maryland, 1884. The salty air carried the scent of the water through the open windows of the modest 2-story home where Sarah Mitchell had spent the past 12 years building a life with her husband, Thomas. The white clapboard house, once filled with laughter and plans for the future, now stood as a silent reminder of everything she'd lost. Sarah stood at the washboard, scrubbing shirts with raw, reddened hands that had once played piano in parlors across Baltimore, before necessity transformed them into the callous tools of a struggling widow. She paused, listening to her youngest daughter Lillian singing in the yard, the 5-year-old's voice rising pure and clear above the chirping of birds. "She sounds just like you used to," Martha Anderson said, appearing at the kitchen doorway. Her grey hair was pulled into a severe bun, her expression one of practiced concern. As Sarah's landlady and Thomas's former employer at the shipyard, Martha had extended countless kindnesses after the accident, kindnesses that were increasingly accompanied by worried glances and tentative suggestions. "I haven't sung in a long time," Sarah replied, pushing a strand of dark hair from her damp forehead. "The Cooper place sold yesterday," Martha said, setting down a basket of eggs. 10 cents on the dollar. The bank's taking everything these days. Sarah's throat tightened. The Coopers had been their neighbors for years, their situation painfully similar to her own, a death, mounting debts, and the relentless pressure of an economy that favored the wealthy and crushed everyone else. "How much longer do you think you can hold on, Sarah?" Martha asked gently. "The girls need more than Marilyn can give them right now." The question hung in the air, giving voice to Sarah's private fears. Since Thomas had been killed in the shipyard accident 2 years ago, she'd taken in mending, sold preserves, and even cleaned houses in Baltimore to keep her daughters fed. Elizabeth, her eldest at 15, had left school to help. Catherine, 13, watched the younger girls when Sarah worked. Anne, 9, and little Lillian, they deserved more than this gradual slide into destitution. Later that evening, after the girls were asleep, Sarah unfolded the letter she'd received 3 weeks earlier. The paper was thin, the journey from Arizona Territory having worn creases into each careful line of her brother-in-law's handwriting. "Sarah, I've secured 160 acres under the Homestead Act just north of Prescott. The land is fertile with a year-round creek and timber enough for building. There's a room waiting for you and the girls at my place until you decide what's best. The railroad reaches as far as Santa Fe now. A wagon train leaves St. Louis monthly for the territories. It wouldn't be an easy journey, but there's nothing for you in Maryland anymore, is there? Thomas would want his daughters to have a future. Your brother, Daniel Mitchell Sarah, traced her fingers over Daniel's signature. Thomas had always spoken fondly of his younger brother, the dreamer who'd headed west 5 years earlier, seeking his, of fortune. They'd exchanged letters regularly, though Daniel's descriptions of the territories seemed more like adventure novels than real places Sarah could imagine. A persistent knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Martha stood on the porch, her expression tight. "Mr. Holloway from the bank is here," she whispered. "He's asking about the mortgage." Sarah's heart sank. The banker was early. She'd thought she had another month before the next payment came. Due. Holloway didn't remove his hat when Sarah invited him into the small parlor. His eyes catalogued the few remaining pieces of good furniture lingering on Thomas's pocket watch on the mantel, a family heirloom she'd refused to sell. Mrs. Mitchell, he began without preamble, I regret to inform you that your extension period has expired. The bank requires immediate payment of $60 or will be forced to begin foreclosure proceedings. $60? Sarah's voice faltered. That's 3 months' payment. We agreed? The terms have changed, Mrs. Mitchell. The Chesapeake Banking Consortium has acquired your mortgage, along with several others in the county. They're not interested in piecemeal payments or sob stories. Sarah stood straighter, anger flaring beneath her fear. My husband died working 16-hour days at the shipyard. I have 4 daughters to feed. This isn't a sob story, Mr. Holloway. It's our lives. His expression remained impassive. You have 2 weeks, Mrs. Mitchell. I suggest you consider your options carefully. After he left, Sarah sank into Thomas's old chair, her mind racing. $60 might as well have been $600. Even if she sold every decent possession they had left, it wouldn't be enough. Mother. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, her nightgown hanging loose on her too thin frame. Though only 15, responsibility had aged her face, making her look eerily like Sarah's own reflection. How much of that did you hear? Sarah asked. Enough. Elizabeth moved to sit at her mother's feet, just as she'd done as a child. We could sell the silver serving set grandmother left you. It wouldn't be enough, Sarah admitted. And then what? Another extension? Another deadline? Another piece of our history sold off? They sat in silence as the house creaked around them, the familiar sounds of home now overlaid with the ticking clock of impending loss. Uncle Daniel's letter, Elizabeth said finally. The one from Arizona. You've read it a dozen times. Sarah nodded slowly. It's so far, Elizabeth. Thousands of miles across the country we've never seen. Dangers we can't imagine. And here? What's waiting for us here except watching everything slip away, piece by piece? The wisdom in her daughters. I struck Sarah powerfully. Elizabeth had always been perceptive, but the hardships of the past 2 years had sharpened her understanding of harsh realities. The next morning, Sarah walked to the telegraph office in town, each step feeling heavier than the last. The contents of her telegram to Daniel were brief, direct. Coming, stop, 4 daughters. Stop, need information on wagon train from St. Louis. Stop. Sarah, his reply arrived the next day, overjoyed. Stop, Anderson wagon train departs St. Louis, May 15th. Stop sending money for passage. Stop courage. Sister, stop Daniel. What followed was a whirlwind of painful decisions. Sarah sold the last of Thomas's tools, his grandfather's desk, and finally, most heartbreaking of all, her mother's piano. Each sale felt like cutting away another connection to their past, yet each brought them closer to the chance for a new beginning. Catherine took the news of their departure with practical acceptance. "Will there be a school in Arizona?" she asked, already packing her treasured books. Anne cried for her friends, but was quickly captivated by Sarah's descriptions of mountains and open skies. Lillian, too young to fully understand, simply asked if her kitten could travel in her pocket. The hardest conversation was with Martha, who had been more than a landlady. She'd been their anchor when grief threatened to drown them. "Arizona," Martha repeated, shaking her head. "It might as well be the moon, Sarah." "It's a chance," Sarah replied. "The only one we have left." Martha pressed a small leather pouch into Sarah's hands. "My husband's pocket money. I've had no use for it since he passed. Don't argue with me, just take it. The territories are no place for a woman without resources. The journey to St. Louis nearly depleted their meager savings. They traveled by train, the girls pressed together on hard wooden benches, watching. The landscape transformed from the familiar rolling hills of Maryland to the vast open plains of the Midwest. Sarah kept a journal, recording their progress and her private fears, writing late into the night by lamplight while her daughters slept. May 12, 1884. St. Louis looks nothing like Baltimore. The city is crawling with fortune seekers, displaced, farmers, and rough-looking men heading west. I wonder how many are running towards something, and how many, like us, are simply running away. Elizabeth has been my rock, but I see the apprehension in her eyes. Catherine studies every new face we pass, storing observations like she's preparing for an exam. Anne has developed a cough that worries me. Only Lillian seems truly excited, collecting pebbles from each new place as though they're precious gems. The Anderson wagon train assembled at the western edge of the city, 26 wagons in all, led by Jackson Anderson, a former cavalry officer who, according to the glowing testimonials of the outfitter who sold Sarah supplies at inflated prices, had never lost a soul on the trail. Their wagon was second-hand but sturdy, pulled by a team of 4 mules that consumed an alarming portion of Daniel's money. Their supplies were basic: flour, beans, coffee, dried meat, and medical supplies that Catherine had insisted upon, having appointed herself the family's physician after devouring a medical text she'd found in a St. Louis bookshop. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're the Mitchell family?" Anderson asked, checking their names against his manifest. He was a tall man with a weathered face and a cavalry officer's straight-backed posture. His eyes lingered on Sarah and her daughters with an expression she couldn't quite read: concern, perhaps, or skepticism. "Yes," Sarah answered, standing taller. "Sarah Mitchell and my daughters Elizabeth, Catherine, Anne, and Lillian." "No men. Ye folk?" he asked, though he clearly knew the answer. "My husband is deceased. We're traveling to join my brother-in-law in Prescott." Anderson nodded slowly. "The trail's no place for a woman alone with children, Mrs. Mitchell. You'd best keep close to the main group, follow instructions precisely, and stay clear of trouble." "We're quick learners, Mr. Anderson," Elizabeth interjected, her chin lifted. In subtle defiance, a ghost of a smile crossed Anderson's face. "I don't doubt that, Miss Mitchell, but the territories don't much care how quick you learn. They'll kill you just the same if you're careless." As they joined the other families, preparing for departure, Sarah was struck by the diversity of their fellow travelers. There were farming families with equipment strapped to their wagons, a group of German immigrants speaking little English, 2 brothers heading to California to establish a trading post, and 3 unmarried women traveling as school teachers for a mission in Santa Fe. One of the school teachers, a reed-thin woman named Harriet Palmer, approached their wagon as Sarah was arranging their meager belongings. "First time on the trail?" she asked, her New England accent crisp against the background noise of the busy camp. Sarah nodded. "Is it that obvious?" Harriet laughed, a surprisingly rich sound from such a spare frame. "Only to another first-timer. I've been studying the guidebooks for months, but nothing quite prepares you for the reality, does it?" A tentative friendship formed as they discovered they were both widows, both musicians in their previous lives. Harriet had taught piano at a girls' school in Boston until consumption claimed her husband, leaving her with debts and painful memories. "I couldn't bear to stay where every street corner reminded me of him," she confided as they shared coffee. "The night before departure. The territories need teachers, and I need to be useful somewhere new." "Do you ever wonder if we're being foolish?" Sarah asked quietly, watching her daughters helping other children gather firewood. "Risking everything for an uncertain future?" Harriet considered this, her thin fingers wrapped around her tin cup. My father used to say that ships are safest in harbour, but that's not what ships are built for. Perhaps women like us weren't built for safe harbours either. The morning of departure dawned clear and cool. Anderson rode along the line of wagons, giving final instructions as the travellers made last-minute adjustments. The mood was a strange mixture of anxiety and excitement, the threshold of a journey from which some might never return. As their wagon rolled forward, taking its place. In the line, Sarah glanced back at St. Louis one last time. The city represented the last outpost of the life she'd known, imperfect and difficult as it had become, but familiar nonetheless. Ahead lay nothing but uncertainty. Elizabeth, sitting beside her on the wagon bench, seemed to read her thoughts. "We can do this, Mother," she said, taking the reins with unexpected confidence. Together. Sarah nodded, forcing her fears down beneath a layer of determination. "Together," she echoed, as the wagon train began its slow procession westward toward a horizon that promised either salvation or ruin. She couldn't know which. Behind them, the Mississippi River gleamed in the morning sun like a silver boundary. Between past and future, between the life they were leaving and whatever waited in the vast, unforgiving territories ahead. The first month on the trail transformed the Mitchell family in ways Sarah could never have anticipated. The sheltered life they'd known in Maryland seemed like a distant dream compared to the harsh realities of westward travel. Days began before dawn and ended long after sunset, filled with endless tasks, harnessing mules, preparing meals over open fires, washing clothes in frigid streams, and repairing wagon wheels damaged by brutal terrain. Elizabeth took to the journey with surprising aptitude. By the third week, she could harness the mules as efficiently as any man in the caravan, her slender arms developing wiry strength from daily labor. Catherine organized their medical supplies with methodical precision, treating Anne's persistent cough with herbal remedies she learned from the German immigrants. Even 9-year-old Anne found purpose collecting, kindling, and helping with the cooking. Little Lillian charmed everyone with her fearless curiosity, becoming a favorite among the travelers who slipped her candies and small treasures. But it was Sarah who underwent the most profound change. The hesitant widow who'd left Maryland increasingly gave way to a woman of quiet determination. She learned to hunt small game with a rifle borrowed from Harriet, mastered the art of finding water in seemingly barren landscapes, and earned the grudging respect of Jackson Anderson, who'd initially viewed her as a liability. "You Mitchell women are tougher than you look," he commented one evening, as Sarah expertly mended a torn wagon. "Cover. Thomas raised you well. I'm raising them now," Sarah replied evenly, not looking up from her stitching. "And they're raising me right back." Anderson nodded, a flicker of something like admiration crossing his weathered face. "Fair enough. We're making good time. Should reach the Colorado Territory by month's end if the weather holds." The weather, however, did not hold. 3 days later, dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, bringing torrential rains that transformed the prairie into a quagmire of mud and swollen creeks. The wagon train was forced to halt for nearly a week. The travelers huddled miserably beneath makeshift shelters as lightning split the sky and thunder rattled their wagons. During this delay, tensions within the caravan surfaced. Food supplies dwindled faster than anticipated. The McAllister brothers, bound for California, argued loudly with Anderson about the route. A family from Ohio lost 2 oxen to lightning strikes, leaving them dependent on the charity of others to continue. Sarah found herself mediating disputes between Harriet and Mrs. Greenberg, the strong-willed matriarch of the German family, over shared cooking space. Elizabeth intervened when 2 teenage boys began fighting over a deck of cards. Catherine treated 3 cases of fever that developed in the damp conditions. "People show their true nature when comfort disappears," Sarah wrote in her journal by lantern light as rain drummed against their wagon canvas. Today I saw both kindness and cruelty in equal measure. The Hendersons shared their last coffee with the Parkers. The Dresden family refused to help pull the Williams wagon from the mud, though they had 4 strong men to spare. I wonder what my own daughters see in me during these trials. Am I the woman I want them to become? When the storms finally passed, leaving behind brilliant blue skies and sodden earth, Anderson called the travelers together. "We've lost time we can't afford," he announced gravely. "There are 2 choices before us. We can follow the established trail through Santa Fe, which is longer but safer, or cut across the northern route through Apache territory. It would save us 3 weeks, but carries greater risk." Murmurs rippled through the gathered families. Everyone knew stories of Apache raids on isolated settlers and wagon trains. "What kind of risk are we talking about?" demanded Frank McAllister, the elder of the California-bound brothers. Anderson's expression remained neutral. "The Apache aren't at war with whites at present, but relations are always uncertain. There's been no reported trouble on that route for 6 months. 6 months isn't very reassuring," Sarah observed quietly. Anderson acknowledged her concern with a nod. "It's not. But winter comes early in the mountains. If we're delayed much longer, we risk snow before reaching the Arizona territory." The debate that followed revealed deep divisions among the travelers. The McAllisters, impatient to reach California before winter, strongly favored the northern route. The German families, already struggling with the journey's hardships, preferred caution. Others wavered, torn between fear and the desire to complete their journey quickly. When Anderson called for a vote, Sarah found herself in the minority. 20 wagons voted for the northern route. Only 6, including the Mitchells, chose the established trail. "Democracy rules on the trail," Anderson concluded. "We head north at first light. Those choosing the southern route are welcome to continue together. But I can't spare men to guide you." That night, Sarah discussed their options with Elizabeth while the younger girls slept. "We could join the Greenbergs and the others taking the southern route," Elizabeth suggested. "Mrs. Greenberg said her oldest son knows the way to Santa Fe." Sarah considered this, weighing the risks against her responsibility to her daughters. 6 wagons alone would be vulnerable, especially with only 4 men among them, and none of them have made the journey before. "So we follow the majority," Elizabeth concluded, "despite your misgivings. Sometimes the only choices are difficult ones." Sarah sighed, echoing a phrase Thomas had often used. "We stay with Anderson. He may be taking a risk I wouldn't choose, but he knows this country. The devil you know is better than the one you don't." The northern route initially seemed to justify the majority's decision. The terrain proved more manageable than expected, with natural water sources and ample grazing for the livestock. They made excellent time, covering nearly 20 miles on good days. Sarah began to hope her concerns had been unfounded. Then came the encounter that would later haunt her dreams. The wagon train had stopped for a midday rest near a small creek when Elizabeth spotted a rider on a distant ridge. "Mother!" she called, quietly, pointing to the lone figure silhouetted against the sky. Sarah shaded her eyes against the bright sun. The rider sat motionless on a painted horse, watching the caravan with unnerving stillness. Even at this distance, his posture and the distinctive pattern of his blanket marked him as Native American. "Mr. Anderson," Sarah called, not taking her eyes from the figure. Anderson followed her gaze, his expression revealing nothing. "Everyone stay calm," he instructed the increasingly nervous travelers. "Keep about your business." "Apache?" one of the McAllister brothers asked, his hand moving toward the rifle propped against his wagon. "No," Anderson replied. "Navajo by the look of him. Different people entirely. What's he doing just watching us like that?" Catherine whispered, moving closer to Sarah. "Observing," Anderson said simply. The Navajo reservation starts about 30 miles west of here. He's probably a scout, keeping track of who passes through the territory." "Is he dangerous?" Sarah asked bluntly. Anderson considered this. "The Navajo have their own troubles with the Apache. They generally keep to themselves, though some trade with white settlers. If anything, his presence suggests the area might be clear of Apache for now." This reasoning calmed the travelers somewhat, though many cast nervous glances toward the ridge. Sarah noticed that Anderson, despite his reassuring words, had quietly instructed several men to keep their rifles within reach. The rider remained in position for nearly an hour, watching their every move. Then, as mysteriously as he had appeared, he turned his horse and vanished behind the ridge. That evening, Sarah observed a heated discussion between Anderson and Frank McAllister. Though she couldn't hear their words, their body language suggested significant disagreement. When Anderson stomped away, Sarah approached the wagon master. "Is there trouble ahead?" she asked directly. Anderson hesitated before answering. "Maybe. That Navajo rider concerned me, though not for the reasons the others thought." "Explain," Sarah prompted. "Navajo scouts don't usually show themselves so openly unless they're sending a message. The fact that he made no attempt to hide, his presence suggests he wanted us to know we're being watched." "Watched for what purpose?" Anderson's face was grim in the fading light. "That's what troubles me. Could be he was warning us away from something ahead. Could be he's noticed the same signs I have." "What signs?" Sarah pressed. "Tracks. Campfires less than 2 days old. More horses than a hunting party would need." He shook his head. "I wanted to delay a day, send scouts ahead, but McAllister and the others are pushing to continue. They think the Navajo was just curious." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. "What do you think?" "I think 20 years in. These territories has taught me to listen when the land sends warnings," Anderson replied. "But I'm outvoted again. We move on at first light." That night, Sarah's sleep was troubled by dreams of the silent watcher on the ridge. In her nightmare, he transformed from observer to harbinger, his stillness a frozen moment before calamity. The next 2 days passed without incident, gradually easing the caravan's tension. They entered a region of increasing beauty, red rock formations rising dramatically from sage-dotted plains, crystal streams flowing between shaded banks, distant mesas glowing gold and crimson in the setting sun. Even Sarah found herself captivated by the landscape's harsh majesty. "It's like God painted the world with different colors out here," Anne observed, sketching the scenery in a small tablet Catherine had given her. On the third morning after sighting the Navajo rider, they reached the edge of a deep canyon. Anderson called it Shadow Rock Pass, a narrow defile with steep walls rising on either side and a swift river cutting through its depths. The trail descended in switchbacks to the canyon floor before climbing the opposite side. Anderson seemed unusually tense as he gave instructions. "Single file through the pass. Keep your distances. If a wagon stumbles, we don't want a pile-up. No stops until we reach the open ground on the far side." Sarah's wagon was positioned in the middle of the caravan. As they began their descent, she could see the lead wagons already reaching the canyon floor, while those behind her disappeared around bends in the switchback trail. The isolation was immediate and disquieting. "Keep the mules steady, Elizabeth," Sarah cautioned, as her eldest handled the reins. "They'll want to rush downhill. Don't let them." Catherine and Anne sat with Sarah on the wagon bench while Lillian dozed inside among their possessions. The wagon creaked ominously as it negotiated the steep decline, every rock and rut threatening to snap an axle or break a wheel. They were halfway down when Elizabeth suddenly pulled the mules to a halt. "Listen," she whispered. At first, Sarah heard nothing beyond the rushing water below and the creak of their wagon. Then it came, a distant popping sound, like corn in a hot skillet. Gunfire, Sarah realized with sudden clarity. The shots multiplied, rapidly echoing through the canyon. Screams followed, then plumes of smoke rising from below. Sarah seized the reins from Elizabeth. "Get inside the wagon," she ordered. "All of you now." The girls scrambled to obey as Sarah assessed their situation. The gunfire came from the canyon floor, where the lead wagons had already descended. Looking back up the trail, she saw riders appearing on the ridge, Apache warriors by their dress and weapons, firing down at the trapped wagons on the switchbacks. Anderson's voice carried up from below. "Defensive positions, circle the wagons." But there was no room to circle on the narrow trail. Each wagon was isolated, vulnerable. Sarah made an instant decision. She wouldn't continue downward into what was clearly an ambush. Instead, she whipped the mules into a frantic turn, using a slightly wider section of trail to pivot the wagon. "Back uphill! Mother, what are you doing?" Catherine cried from inside. "Finding another way," Sarah answered grimly, urging the terrified mules upward against their instincts. They hadn't gone 20 yards when an explosion rocked the canyon. Sarah looked down to see that someone, Anderson perhaps, had detonated a powder keg, trying to create a momentary advantage against the attackers. The blast spooked their mules beyond control. They bolted sideways, tipping the wagon precariously toward the edge of the trail. Sarah felt herself falling as the wagon pitched over, tumbling down the rocky slope beside the trail. The world spun violently, her daughter's screams mingling with the crack of splintering wood. Sarah held the reins in a death grip, as if they could somehow protect her children from the impact that was surely coming. When the wagon finally crashed to a stop, it had come to rest upside down in a shallow ravine about 50 yards below the trail. By some miracle, the canvas cover had remained partially intact, though bent wagon hoops now formed a protective cage around them. One of the mules lay dead, impaled by a broken shaft. The others had broken free and vanished. "Is everyone alive?" Sarah gasped, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Elizabeth, Catherine, Anne, Lillian. Through choking dust and splinters, the girls responded, bruised, terrified, but alive. Sarah offered silent thanks, then assessed their situation. Their overturned wagon had landed in a depression, invisible from both the trail above and the canyon floor below. Through gaps in the shattered wood and torn canvas, Sarah could see the massacre continuing. Apache warriors swarmed through the caravan, firing into wagons, setting them ablaze. Men fought desperately to protect their families. Women and children ran for cover, only to be cut down. "Don't make a sound," Sarah whispered, gathering her daughters into the most protected corner of their ruined wagon. Not a whisper. For hours they huddled in silence as death raged around them. The Apache were thorough, checking each wagon, each body. Sarah watched through a crack as Harriet Palmer was dragged screaming from her hiding place. She clamped her hand over Lillian's mouth to stifle her youngest daughter's sob. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon in blood-red light, Sarah noticed a lone figure on horseback, observing the carnage from the upper ridge, the same Navajo man they'd seen days earlier. He sat motionless, separated from both the settlers and the Apache, a witness rather than a participant. Their eyes met briefly through the narrow gap in the wagon planks. Sarah felt a chill of recognition pass through her. Could he see her? Did he know they were alive down here? Would he alert the Apache to their presence? The warrior turned his horse and vanished from sight just as darkness began to fall over the canyon. Night brought relative quiet. The Apache withdrew with their plunder, leaving behind charred wagons and scattered bodies. Sarah dared not move, uncertain if sentries remained or if the attackers would return at dawn to ensure no survivors remained. Her daughters drifted into exhausted sleep one by one, while Sarah maintained her vigil. Thomas's old revolver clutched in her hand. She'd never fired it, but the weight of it steadied her resolve. If they were discovered, she would not let her daughters be taken alive. Shortly after midnight, she heard soft footfalls approaching their hiding place. Sarah raised the revolver, aiming at the torn canvas where moonlight cast a shadow. A voice spoke in heavily accented English. "You are alive in there." Not a question, a statement. Sarah's finger tensed on the trigger. "We are armed." Silence followed. Then, "The Apache have gone north with their spoils. They believe all settlers are dead. If you stay quiet, they will not return." Sarah recognized the voice somehow, though she had never heard it before. It belonged to the Navajo observer. "Why are you here?" she demanded quietly. The shadow moved, and the canvas parted slightly. In the faint moonlight, Sarah saw the warrior's face for the first time. Strong features, deep-set eyes, a single eagle feather tied into his long black hair. He carried no visible weapon. "I am called James Eaglefeather," he said. "My mother was Navajo. My father was a white trader." Sarah kept the revolver steady. "Why are you helping us?" Eaglefeather was silent for a long moment. "I have seen enough death." He extended a waterskin through the opening. "Drink, then remain hidden until full daylight. I will return." Before Sarah could respond, he vanished into the darkness as silently as he had appeared. Elizabeth stirred beside her. "Mother, who was that?" Sarah stared at the waterskin in her hands, fighting against both hope and suspicion. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted, "but I think he might be our only chance of survival." Dawn broke over Shadow Rock Canyon, revealing the full extent of the devastation. From their hiding place, beneath the overturned wagon, Sarah watched as scavengers began to descend upon the massacre site. Vultures circled overhead, their shadows passing like dark omens across the canyon floor. The acrid smell of burned wood, gunpowder, and death hung thick in the morning air. "We can't stay here," Elizabeth whispered, her face streaked with dirt and dried tears. "The bodies will attract predators." Sarah nodded grimly. "We'll wait another hour to be certain the Apache aren't watching for survivors." Catherine, ever practical despite her obvious shock, had already begun taking inventory of their salvageable supplies. "The food box cracked open, but most of it's still good. We have 2 canteens plus the waterskin that man gave us. Father's revolver has 4 bullets left." "What about the medicine chest?" Sarah asked, her eyes drawn to Lillian, who huddled beneath their only intact blanket, her small face too pale, too quiet. Anne, who had remained remarkably composed throughout the ordeal, retrieved the small wooden box from beneath a pile of scattered clothing. "It wasn't damaged in the fall, but Lillian's fever is getting worse." Sarah turned to her youngest daughter with renewed concern. In the chaos of their escape and hiding, she hadn't noticed Lillian's flushed cheeks and labored breathing. The fall had evidently aggravated the chronic lung weakness the child had suffered since infancy. "We need shelter," Sarah decided. "Proper rest and medicine." "Where?" Elizabeth asked, frustration edging her voice. "We're at least 4 days from the nearest settlement, and that's if we had horses." Before Sarah could respond, a shadow fell across the torn canvas. The Mitchell women froze in terror until Sarah recognized the silhouette. "James Eaglefeather," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady despite her daughter's evident fear. The Navajo warrior crouched beside their hiding place. "You must come with me now," he said without preamble. "Apache scouts are returning to count their victory marks on the dead." Sarah hesitated only briefly before nodding. "My youngest is sick. She can't walk far." Eaglefeather's expression remained impassive. "I have brought a horse. You and the small one will ride. The others must walk. Bring only what you need to. Survive." Within minutes they had gathered their most essential belongings: food, water, medicine, Sarah's sewing kit, Thomas's watch and revolver. Eaglefeather led them up a nearly invisible game trail that wound away from the canyon, avoiding the main path where the Apache would return. Lillian clung weakly to Sarah's back as they rode Eagle Feather's painted mare. Elizabeth, Catherine, and Anne followed on foot, stumbling occasionally from exhaustion and shock. No one spoke. The only sounds were their footsteps, Lillian's labored breathing, and the occasional cry of a distant hawk. After an hour of difficult travel, Sarah finally broke the silence. "Where are you taking us?" Eagle Feather glanced back, his dark eyes unreadable. "There is a place, hidden, safe for now." "And why are you helping us?" Elizabeth demanded, her voice wavering between gratitude and suspicion. The warrior continued, walking without looking back. "I will explain when we are safe." By midday, they had climbed high into the foothills. Shadow Rock Canyon was now a distant wound in the landscape below. Lillian's fever had worsened, her small body burning against Sarah's back. They paused briefly by a spring to refill their water containers and dampen Lillian's forehead. "How much?" "Farther?" Sarah asked, anxiety tightening her throat as she cradled her youngest. "Before sundown," Eagle Feather replied, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. "The little one needs medicine more powerful than what you carry." Sarah, normally cautious with strangers, found herself trusting this man's assessment. "Do you have such medicine?" "Yes," he answered simply, "but we must reach shelter first." Catherine, who had been studying Eagle Feather with careful attention, approached him hesitantly. "Are you a medicine man?" Something like sadness flickered across his stoic features. "No, but my grandmother was a healer. She taught me the plants that drive away fever." They continued their journey, the terrain growing increasingly rugged. Eagle Feather led them through narrow passages between towering rocks, across dry stream beds, and beneath overhanging cliffs, a route deliberately difficult to follow. Sarah realized he was taking precautions against pursuit, creating a trail that even experienced trackers would struggle to detect. Late afternoon brought them to a hidden valley nestled between steep mesa walls. A small stream carved its way through the center, feeding a cluster of cottonwood trees. Beneath the largest tree stood a stone and timber structure, part cave, part cabin, built into the natural contour of the rock face. "My father built this." "And place," Eagle Feather explained, as he helped Sarah dismount with Lillian. "He came here to hunt, to trade, and to visit my mother when the whites would not accept their union." Inside, the dwelling was sparse but serviceable. A stone fireplace, simple wooden furnishings, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and animal hides covering the packed earth floor. Eagle Feather immediately set about lighting a fire and preparing a medicinal tea from plants gathered along their journey. "Your father," Sarah began hesitantly as she settled Lillian onto a pallet of soft furs. "You mentioned he was white?" Eagle Feather nodded, without looking up from his work. "Samuel Feather, a fair man. He died when Apache raided his trading post 8 winters ago." "And your mother?" A shadow passed over the warrior's features. "She returned to her people after he died. The sickness took her 3 summers later." Catherine hovered nearby, watching intently as Eagle Feather prepared the herbal remedy. Her natural scientific curiosity had overcome her initial fear. "What are you using for the fever?" "Willow bark," he replied, allowing her to observe. "And these purple flowers that grow by the stream. My people call them breath-bringers." When the tea was ready, Eagle Feather helped Sarah lift Lillian's head. "She must drink all of it. The taste is bitter, but the medicine is strong." Lillian grimaced at the first sip, but obediently swallowed. Under her mother's encouraging gaze, within an hour her breathing eased and the fever began to recede. Sarah felt the first genuine relief since the attack. As darkness fell, Eagle Feather prepared a simple meal of dried meat, pine nuts, and wild onions. The girls ate ravenously, the shock of survival giving way to bodily needs too long ignored. Sarah merely picked at her food, questions churning in her mind. After the meal, Elizabeth and Catherine took Anne to the stream to wash away the dirt and blood of their ordeal. Lillian slept peacefully on her pallet. At last, Sarah found herself alone with their mysterious savior. "I need to understand," she said quietly, meeting his gaze across the dying fire. "You were watching when the wagon train was attacked. You could have warned us." Eagle Feather's face remained impassive. "I tried. I spoke to your guide the night before. I told him Apache were watching the canyon passage." Sarah's breath caught. Anderson knew. He wanted to wait, to find another path. The others refused to listen. The pieces fell into place in Sarah's mind. Anderson's concerned expression after sighting the Navajo rider, his heated argument with McAllister, his increased vigilance as they approached the canyon. "You could have been more forceful in your warning," she pressed. Eagle Feather's eyes reflected the fading embers. "My words mean little to white settlers. Many see all native people as enemies. If I had approached your caravan directly, I might have been shot before speaking." Sarah looked away, unable to deny the truth in his words. "Yet you came back. You found us. Why save us and not the others?" For the first time, emotion broke through Eagle Feather's stoic expression. A flash of old pain quickly controlled. "By the time I reached the canyon floor, only death remained. Except for your wagon, I saw movement, a mother protecting her daughters." He paused, then added softly, "I have seen too many innocent ones die." Before Sarah could respond, the girls returned from the stream, clean but exhausted. The conversation ended as they settled in for the night, Eagle Feather taking a position near the door, apart from the Mitchell family. In the dim light, Sarah studied their rescuer as he stared vigilantly into the darkness beyond the dwelling. What had he seen that drove him to risk his life for strangers? What ghosts haunted his vigil? Morning brought new challenges. Lillian's fever had broken, but she remained weak. While the hidden valley offered temporary sanctuary, it could not be their permanent refuge. "We need to reach Prescott," Sarah declared, as they shared a breakfast of dried berries and pine nuts. "My brother-in-law is expecting us. He'll send help once he realizes we never arrived." "When would he expect you?" Eagle Feather asked. "Not for another 3 weeks," Sarah admitted. "It could be a month or more before he raises an alarm." "The nearest white settlement is 4 days' hard travel," Eagle Feather said. "The terrain is difficult, water scarce. With children, one of them is sick. It would be dangerous." "More dangerous than staying here," Elizabeth challenged. Eagle Feather studied the eldest Mitchell daughter, noting her fierce protectiveness. "Perhaps not. But there is another way." He hesitated before continuing. "My mother's people, the Navajo, have a trading post 3 days from here. They deal fairly with honest whites. They could provide supplies, perhaps even escorts to Prescott." Sarah weighed their options carefully. They had no wagon, minimal supplies, and Lillian was still recovering. The promise of assistance, even from an unfamiliar culture, outweighed the dangers of attempting the journey alone. "When could we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Eagle Feather replied. "The little one needs another day of rest. I will hunt today, prepare food for the journey." When Eagle Feather departed with his bow and hunting knife, Catherine voiced the concern that had been growing among the sisters. "Can we truly trust him, Mother? We know nothing about him." "He saved our lives," Sarah reminded her. "He cared for Lillian when he could have left us to fend for ourselves. But he still—" Anne trailed off, unable to articulate the cultural gulf that separated them from their rescuer. "Different," Sarah finished gently. "Yes, his world is not ours, but he has shown more humanity than those who attacked us." She touched the revolver tucked into her skirt. "Besides, we are not entirely defenseless." While Lillian slept and the other girls repaired their torn clothing using Sarah's sewing kit, Sarah explored the small dwelling. On a crude shelf carved into the rock wall, she discovered a worn Bible. a tarnished silver locket, and a child's wooden toy, a small horse carved with fading painted designs. The locket contained a miniature portrait of a stern-faced white man, with a full beard and the same deep-set eyes as Eagle Feather. Beside it was a lock of black hair tied with a thread of red wool. Sarah carefully replaced these private treasures, but the glimpse into their rescuer's past deepened her curiosity. When Eagle Feather returned with 2 rabbits and a string of small fish, Sarah was kneading a simple dough made from ground pine, nuts and dried berries. Their eyes met briefly in mutual recognition of the domestic partnership they had temporarily formed, an unspoken understanding beyond words or custom. That evening, as they prepared for sleep, Lillian asked the question that had been troubling her. "Mr. Eagle Feather, are there other survivors from our wagon train? Other children like us?" The warrior's expression softened as he looked at the small girl. "I found no others alive. I'm sorry." "The Hendersons had a daughter my age," Lillian whispered. "Her name was Mary." Eagle Feather knelt beside Lillian's pallet. "In my mother's tradition, we believe those who die before their time become stars in the night sky. Perhaps your friend watches over you now." Lillian considered this solemnly. "Do you think she's afraid, being up there alone?" "No," Eagle Feather said gently. "The Sky People are never alone. They travel together, telling stories across the heavens." Later, when the girls slept, Sarah found Eagle Feather outside, gazing at the star-filled sky. "Thank you," she said simply, "for what you told Lillian." "It was not merely comfort," he replied. "It is what my people believe." "And what do you believe?" Sarah asked. "With a father who read the Bible and a mother who saw ancestors in the stars?" Eagle Feather was silent for a long moment. "I believe there are many paths to the same mountain peak. My father's God and my mother's spirits may be different faces of the same truth." Sarah wrapped her shawl tighter against the night chill. "When the Apache attacked, you spoke of having seen too many innocent ones die. What did you mean?" The question hung between them, weightier than mere words. Eagle Feather's face remained impassive, but something shifted in his eyes, a door opening onto old wounds. "4 winters ago," he began, his voice low, "I had a wife, Naya, and a daughter, Kinney. They were visiting Naya's family at a settlement near the border of Apache territory when a conflict erupted between settlers and an Apache hunting party. The soldiers who came did not distinguish between Apache and Navajo. They fired upon all native people in the area." He paused, his composure momentarily fracturing. "My wife and daughter were among those killed, not by Apache, not by sickness or accident, by men who saw only their skin, not their innocence." "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, the inadequacy of the words burning in her throat. "When I saw you in the canyon," Eagle Feather continued, "a mother shielding her daughters, I saw what might have been, what should have been. I could not watch it happen again." The revelation settled between them, the true reason for their rescue, the bond of shared loss that transcended their differences. Sarah found herself reaching out, her hand coming to rest lightly on his forearm. "James," she said, using his given name for the first time, "your wife and daughter would be proud of what you did for us." Something unspoken passed between them. In that moment, a recognition, a possibility neither was ready to acknowledge. Eagle Feather gently withdrew his arm. "We should rest," he said. "Tomorrow's journey will test us all." Dawn brought clear skies and cooler temperatures, favorable conditions for travel. Lillian's strength had improved enough for her to walk short distances, though Eagle Feather insisted she ride the horse when she tired. They departed the hidden valley as the sun crested the eastern mesas, following a different path than the one that had brought them there. "This route is longer but safer," Eagle Feather explained. "We will follow the high ridges where we can see anyone approaching." As they set out, Sarah cast one last glance at the stone dwelling that had sheltered them. It represented a boundary, crossed, a threshold between the life they had lost and whatever uncertain future awaited them among Eagle Feather's people. Despite her lingering fears, Sarah felt a strange sense of purpose as she walked beside Eagle Feather's horse, her daughters, following close behind. They had survived when no one else had. Perhaps that survival carried an obligation to bridge the chasm between worlds that had claimed so many lives. Ahead lay the unknown, but for the first time since leaving Maryland, Sarah faced it not with desperation, but with genuine hope. The day passed in careful progress through rugged terrain. Eagle Feather moved with the instinctive grace of one born to the landscape, occasionally pointing out landmarks or plants of significance. The Mitchell women, though still weakened by their ordeal, found unexpected reserves of determination. Even Anne, who had always been considered delicate, scrambled over rocks and forded shallow streams without complaint. By midday, they had covered considerable ground. During their brief rest, Catherine approached Eagle Feather with tentative curiosity. "How do you navigate without a compass?" she asked. "There are no marked trails here." "The land speaks to those who listen," he replied, pointing to subtle signs Catherine had overlooked. The pattern of lichen on rocks indicating north, the specific tilt of certain plants following the sun's path, distant mountain profiles providing consistent reference points. Catherine absorbed the lesson with growing respect. "Our father used to say that knowledge comes in many forms. I think he would have appreciated yours." Eagle Feather acknowledged this with a slight nod. "And I would have respected his. My father taught me to read white men's books alongside my mother's teachings about the natural world. Both have value." They resumed their journey, the mutual wariness between the Mitchells and their guide gradually giving way to cautious rapport. Elizabeth scouted ahead with Eagle Feather, her natural leadership complementing his wilderness experience. Catherine continued her impromptu study of native plants, mentally cataloguing their properties. Anne mapped their progress on a scrap of paper, creating her own system of symbols for landmarks. Only Sarah remained somewhat distant, her thoughts constantly shifting between gratitude for their rescue and anxiety about their uncertain future. The weight of her family's survival pressed upon her like a physical burden. As twilight approached, Eagle Feather led them to a protected hollow beneath an overhanging cliff. "We will camp here tonight," he announced. "There is water nearby, and the rock will hide our fire from distant eyes." While the girls gathered firewood and prepared their simple meal, Sarah stood at the edge of their campsite, gazing westward toward the fading light. Somewhere in that direction lay Daniel's homestead, the promise of security that had driven them from Maryland into this wilderness. She felt Eagle Feather's presence before he spoke. "You are troubled." Sarah didn't turn. "I've led my daughters into disaster. Everything we owned is destroyed. Even if we reach Prescott, I have nothing left to build a new life." "You have what matters most," Eagle Feather said quietly. "Your daughters live. You live. The rest is just things." "Things that meant security," Sarah countered. "Things that meant we wouldn't starve or freeze when winter comes." Eagle Feather moved to stand beside her, his gaze following hers toward the horizon. "When my wife and daughter died, I abandoned my father's trading post. I lived in the mountains, alone for nearly 2 years, hunting only what I needed, speaking to no one. I thought I had lost everything worth living for." Sarah turned to study his profile, sharp against the darkening sky. "What changed?" "An elder from my mother's people found me. He said, 'The dead are not honored by throwing away the life they would have cherished.' It was many months before I understood his wisdom." Eagle Feather looked directly at Sarah. "Your daughters need you to believe in tomorrow, even when it seems impossible." The simplicity and truth of his words penetrated Sarah's despair. Whatever uncertainties lay ahead, she still had her girls. They still had each other. It would have to be enough. That night, as the fire burned low and the stars emerged in brilliant profusion, Sarah felt a subtle shift within herself. Not hope exactly, but perhaps its precursor. The recognition that survival itself was a kind of triumph. She didn't realize that Eagle Feather watched her from across the fire, seeing in her resilience a mirror of his own painful journey from devastation to tentative renewal. Neither spoke of what passed between them in those quiet moments. Neither needed to. The second day of their journey brought new challenges. By mid-morning, dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, threatening the first significant rainfall in months. Eagle Feather studied the approaching storm with concern. "We must find shelter before it breaks," he told Sarah as they paused atop a ridge. "Desert rains can be dangerous. Flash floods come without warning." Elizabeth shaded her eyes against the sun. "There's nothing but open country ahead. There are caves in the red cliffs." Eagle Feather pointed to a distant formation. "We can reach them before the storm if we hurry." They quickened their pace, Lillian now riding on Eagle Feather's shoulders to spare the horse for their supplies. The temperature dropped precipitously as the storm clouds advanced, casting the landscape in premature twilight. Thunder rumbled across the plains, startling a herd of pronghorn antelope into flight. "It's coming faster than I expected," Eagle Feather admitted, his usual confidence wavering. The first heavy raindrops struck as they reached the base of the red cliffs. Within moments, the gentle patter transformed into a violent downpour. Water streamed down the rock face and pooled at their feet, quickly rising. "There!" Anne shouted, pointing to a dark opening halfway up the cliff face. "A cave!" Eagle Feather assessed the steep climb. "The path will be slippery." He handed Lillian to Sarah. "I'll go first with a rope. The rest of you follow only when I signal." Using his hunting knife to gain purchase in the softening clay, Eagle Feather scaled the cliff face with practiced efficiency. Upon reaching the cave entrance, he secured a rope and lowered it for the others. Elizabeth went next, followed by Catherine, then Anne. Sarah came last, with Lillian clinging to her back. The rain intensified, making each handhold treacherous. Halfway up, Sarah's foot slipped on the slick clay. She swung outward, dangling momentarily over the rapidly filling wash below. "Hold on!" Eagle Feather shouted, already descending to assist. Before he could reach her, Elizabeth and Catherine pulled frantically on the rope from above. Their combined efforts stabilized Sarah long enough for her to regain her footing. With a final desperate lunge, she reached the cave entrance, where Eagle Feather's strong hands pulled her and Lillian to safety. They collapsed inside, soaked and gasping as lightning split the sky outside. The storm's fury seemed to mock their narrow escape, winds howling through the canyon like vengeful spirits. "That was too close," Sarah whispered, holding Lillian tightly against her. "Thank you, all of you." Eagle Feather moved deeper into the cave, using a small torch fashioned from resinous wood to light their surroundings. The cave extended farther than expected, opening into a series of chambers. Ancient handprints decorated the walls alongside faded pictographs of animals and hunters. "This place is old," he said with quiet reverence. "My people's ancestors sheltered here long before the Spanish came." Catherine approached the wall paintings, fascinated. "Who made these?" "The ancient ones, those who built the cliff cities, to the north." Eagle Feather touched one of the handprints gently. "They vanished centuries ago, but their spirit remains in places like this. While the storm raged outside, they made camp in the cave's inner chamber. Using wood that previous travelers had stored, Eagle Feather built a small fire that cast dancing shadows across the ancient artwork. The girls huddled near its warmth, their wet clothing steaming gently. "Will the storm delay us long?" Sarah asked, conscious of Lillian's lingering weakness and their dwindling supplies. "A day, perhaps," Eagle Feather replied. The washes will be dangerous to cross until the water recedes. As the afternoon faded into evening, Anne discovered a natural cistern in the cave's depths, a deep pool of fresh water collected from centuries of seepage through the porous sandstone. This unexpected blessing allowed them to refill their containers and even wash away the worst of the trail's grime. That night, their enforced shelter created a moment of peace amid their desperate journey. Lillian's breathing had improved enough for her to join in when Anne began singing softly, a lullaby their father had taught them in what now seemed like another lifetime. After the girls fell asleep, Sarah found Eagle Feather standing at the cave entrance, watching the storm's fury gradually subside. Lightning still flickered occasionally, illuminating his profile in stark relief against the darkness. "I keep thinking about what you said yesterday," Sarah began, coming to stand beside him. "About your wife and daughter." Eagle Feather remained silent, but his posture acknowledged her presence. "I lost my husband 3 years ago to pneumonia," she continued. "It was peaceful. He simply didn't wake one morning. I've often thought that was a mercy compared to—" She faltered, unable to articulate the violence they had witnessed. "Compared to watching him die at another's hand," Eagle Feather finished. "Yes, there is a difference." "Does it ever fade?" Sarah asked. "The anger?" Eagle Feather considered this carefully. "Not fade, transform. Like water over stone, it shapes you differently with time." "I'm not sure I want to be reshaped," Sarah admitted. "We don't choose whether life changes us," he replied. "Only how we meet that change." They stood together in companionable silence until the last rumbles of thunder faded into the distance. Before returning to her sleeping daughters, Sarah spoke once more. "James," she said softly, "I'm glad it was you who found us." Dawn revealed a transformed landscape. The previously dusty terrain had erupted into vibrant life overnight. Dormant seeds awakening, desert flowers unfurling, small creatures emerging from burrows to drink from temporary pools. The air smelled of wet earth and sage. Eagle Feather studied the terrain with experienced eyes. "The main washes will be impassable until midday. We should remain here until then." The unexpected respite allowed them to thoroughly dry their clothing and belongings. While Eagle Feather hunted along the cliff base, bringing back 2 rabbits and a clutch of quail eggs, Sarah led the girls in taking inventory of their remaining supplies. "We have enough food for 2 days if we're careful," Elizabeth calculated. "The medicine is holding out, and Lillian seems stronger today." Lillian, eager to prove her recovery, had appointed herself guardian of their small campfire. "Mr. Eagle Feather said we'll reach his people's trading post tomorrow if the ground dries enough to travel." "And then what, Mother?" Catherine asked, quietly, voicing the question that had been troubling them all. "Even if we reach Prescott, how will we ever get to Uncle Daniel? How will we start over with nothing?" Sarah smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. "One step at a time. First we survive, then we reach safety. The rest will follow." By early afternoon, the landscape had dried sufficiently for travel. Eagle Feather guided them along the higher ridges, avoiding the still-swollen stream beds. The desert's brief flowering made their journey almost pleasant, the harsh terrain softened by patches of wildflowers and the calls of birds that had appeared seemingly from nowhere. "It's like the world is celebrating," Anne observed, her artistic nature responding to the transformation around them. "The desert never truly sleeps," Eagle Feather explained. "It waits, patient as stone, for these moments of renewal." They made good progress throughout the afternoon. By evening, Eagle Feather pointed to a distant mesa, outlined against the setting sun. "Beyond that lies the trading post. We will reach it by midday tomorrow." That night, as they camped beneath a solitary juniper tree, Sarah noticed a subtle shift in Eagle Feather's demeanor, a growing tension in his shoulders, a watchfulness beyond his usual vigilance. "Is something wrong?" she asked when the girls had retired. Eagle Feather hesitated before answering. "We are approaching the boundary between worlds. My reception among my mother's people has not always been welcoming. My father's blood makes me suspect in some eyes." "You're concerned about how they'll receive us," Sarah realized. "The trading post deals with white settlers regularly," he assured her. "But bringing you directly after the Apache attack, some will question my judgment." "We could find another way," Sarah offered, though she knew their options were limited. Eagle Feather shook his head. "This is still the safest path for you. I merely want you prepared. Stay close tomorrow. Let me speak first." The following morning brought clear skies and warming temperatures, perfect traveling conditions. They departed early, following a faint trail that wound through a landscape of twisted junipers and volcanic rock formations. By mid-morning, they detected the first signs of human presence, a carefully stacked pile of stones marking a boundary, then brief glimpses of distant shepherds with flocks of sheep and goats on the hillsides. "We are on Navajo land now," Eagle Feather informed them. "Those men have already seen us. Word will reach the trading post before we arrive." As predicted, they approached the mesa by midday. The trading post occupied a natural alcove at its base, a collection of log structures and traditional hogans arranged around a central courtyard. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and horses grazed in a nearby corral. Before they could approach, 6 mounted warriors appeared from behind a rocky outcropping, forming a barrier across their path. The leader, a powerfully built man with silver streaking his black hair, addressed Eagle Feather sharply in the Navajo language. Sarah felt her daughters press closer to her as the tense exchange continued. Though she couldn't understand the words, the confrontational tone was unmistakable. Eagle Feather remained composed, responding with quiet dignity despite the other man's increasing agitation. Finally, the leader turned his attention to Sarah, switching to heavily accented English. "I am Swift River, headman of this post. Why do you bring these whites here, James Eagle Feather? Apache raid white wagons 3 days ago, many dead. Some say you were there." "I was," Eagle Feather confirmed. "These 5 survived. The mother protected her daughters when all others perished. I could not leave them to die." Swift River's dark eyes assessed Sarah with open suspicion. "And you trust this half-blood to guide you, white woman?" Sarah straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "With my life and my daughters' lives. He has shown us nothing but honor and kindness when he could have left us to die." An older woman emerged from the largest hogan, her silver hair bound. In a traditional knot, her face deeply lined by sun and time. She approached with unhurried dignity, studying the Mitchell women with piercing eyes. "These children have known hunger and fear," she stated, rather than asked, her English flowing more smoothly than Swift River's. "The small one has been sick." "Yes, grandmother," Eagle Feather confirmed respectfully. "I used the medicine you taught me for her fever." The old woman nodded once, then turned to Swift River. "They will stay in my dwelling tonight. The trading can be discussed after they have rested and eaten." Swift River frowned but offered no argument. The old woman, whom Eagle Feather later identified as Morning Sky, a respected elder and healer, led the Mitchells to her home, a spacious hogan with a central fire pit and neatly arranged sleeping platforms around its circular perimeter. "My grandson has a good heart," she told Sarah, as she served them a hearty stew of corn, beans, and rabbit. "But the path between our worlds is dangerous for those with feet in both." "Your grandson?" Sarah asked, surprised. Morning Sky's weathered face softened slightly. "My daughter was his mother. She chose a white trader against my counsel, but he proved a better man than most. James carries both their spirits." Throughout the afternoon, the Mitchell girls gradually relaxed under Morning Sky's grandmotherly attention. She showed Anne how to grind corn using a traditional stone metate, helped Catherine identify medicinal plants growing near the Hogan, and delighted Lillian with stories of Coyote, the trickster figure in Navajo mythology. Even Elizabeth, initially the most wary, found herself assisting the elder with weaving preparations, learning the patterns that would eventually become a blanket. Meanwhile, Eagle Feather conferred with Swift River and other community leaders in the trading post's main building. Through the open doorway, Sarah occasionally glimpsed their serious expressions and animated gestures. The fate of her family, she realized, was being debated by people whose language she didn't understand, whose customs remained mysterious. As sunset approached, Eagle Feather finally emerged from the discussion. He found Sarah sitting outside Morning Sky's Hogan, watching Lillian play with several Navajo children who had overcome their initial shyness. "They have agreed to help," he told her without preamble. "A supply wagon leaves for Santa Fe in 2 days. The trader who owns it will take you for a price." "What price?" Sarah asked cautiously. "We lost everything in the attack." Eagle Feather's expression remained neutral. "I have arranged payment." Before Sarah could press for details, Morning Sky called them for the evening meal. Inside the Hogan, the atmosphere had transformed. Swift River and several other community members joined them, the earlier hostility replaced by cautious civility. A young man brought out a guitar, a European instrument adapted to native music, and played soft melodies as they ate. After dinner, Swift River addressed Sarah directly. "Eagle Feather tells us you seek your brother's home in Prescott Territory." "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Daniel Mitchell. He has a homestead north of the town." Swift River nodded. "We know this place. Many whites settle there now." He exchanged glances with Morning Sky before continuing. "The trader Wilson will take you to Santa Fe. From there, the army sends regular patrols to Prescott. You can arrange passage." "Thank you," Sarah said sincerely. "Your help means everything to us." "It is not given without condition," Swift River cautioned. "What happened at Shadow Rock Canyon will bring soldiers. They will ask questions, seek vengeance. When you reach Santa Fe, what will you tell them?" "About Eagle Feather." The question hung in the air, weighted with implications Sarah immediately understood. The military would want someone to blame for the massacre. To many white authorities, one Native American looked much like another. Eagle Feather's presence near the attack could easily be misinterpreted or deliberately misconstrued by those seeking any excuse for retaliation. "I will tell them the truth," Sarah stated firmly, "that the Apache were responsible for the attack and that a Navajo man named James Eagle Feather saved our lives at great personal risk. Without him, 5 more graves would have been dug at Shadow Rock Canyon." Swift River studied her intently, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, he nodded once. "Then we have understanding." Later that night, after the visitors had departed and her daughters slept soundly for the first time in days, Sarah slipped outside to clear her thoughts. The trading post was peaceful under the vast canopy of stars, most dwellings dark except for the main building where a lamp still burned. She found Eagle Feather sitting alone outside, carving a small piece of wood with his hunting knife. Without speaking, Sarah sat beside him on the rough-hewn bench. "What did you trade for our passage to Santa Fe?" she asked after a comfortable silence. Eagle Feather's hands stilled. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Sarah insisted gently. He sighed, setting aside his carving. "My father's gold watch and my horse." Sarah's breath caught. "James, no, those are your only valuables." "They are just things," he echoed his earlier words to her. "Your lives are worth more." "Why would you make such a sacrifice for strangers?" Sarah pressed, needing to understand. Eagle Feather turned to face her directly, his dark eyes reflecting starlight. "Are we still strangers, Sarah Mitchell?" The question penetrated her carefully maintained composure. No, they weren't strangers anymore. In the space of 4 days, This man had transformed from a mysterious observer to their rescuer, their guide, and now something else she couldn't quite define. No, she admitted softly, not strangers. But I still don't understand why you would give up so much. Eagle Feather resumed his carving, the knife moving in sure, practiced strokes. When my wife and daughter died, I thought nothing remained for me in this world. I existed without purpose. Then I found 5 lives I could save. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Perhaps in saving you, I also saved myself. Sarah watched his hands shape the wood, gradually revealing the form of a small horse. She recognized it as a gift for Lillian, who had been admiring the painted ponies in the trading post corral. "What will you do after we reach Santa Fe?" She asked. "Return here, continue as before." He shrugged slightly. "My grandmother needs me, especially now that her sight dims with age." "Will you ever visit the white settlements again?" The question emerged before Sarah could reconsider its implications. Eagle Feather glanced at her, something unspoken passing between them. Perhaps, if there was reason enough. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither dared articulate. Finally, Eagle Feather handed her the finished carving, a perfect miniature horse, its lines flowing and graceful despite the simplicity of his tools. "For Lillian," he said, "to remember her journey. She won't need a carving." "To remember you," Sarah replied softly. "None of us will." She returned to Morning Sky's Hogan with the wooden horse clutched in her hand, her thoughts in turmoil. Tomorrow, they would prepare for the journey to Santa Fe, another step toward the security she had sought for her daughters. Yet, for the first time since leaving Maryland, Sarah found herself reluctant to continue their westward journey. As she settled onto her sleeping mat, Sarah acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. In the midst of tragedy and survival, she had formed a connection she never expected, with a man whose world was separated from hers by boundaries far more imposing than mere distance. 2 paths diverged before her, forward to her brother-in-law's homestead and the promise of conventional security, or into uncharted territory, where nothing was certain except the pull of a connection she couldn't explain but couldn't deny. Morning would bring practical concerns and preparations for their journey. But tonight, beneath a shared canopy of stars, Sarah allowed herself to wonder about roads not taken and the cost of crossing boundaries, both seen and unseen. Dawn at the trading post brought a flurry of activity. Wilson, the trader who would take the Mitchells to Santa Fe, arrived with his wagon, a sturdy vehicle drawn by 4 mules and loaded with wool blankets, silver jewelry, and tanned hides bound for eastern markets. A burly man with a sun-reddened face partially hidden beneath a graying beard, he inspected his new passengers with businesslike efficiency. 2 days to Santa Fe if the weather holds, he informed Sarah. You and the little one can ride in the wagon. The older girls will need to walk alongside. We're accustomed to walking, Elizabeth assured him, her protective instincts flaring. At his brisk manner, Wilson nodded curtly. We leave in 2 hours. Be ready. As the Mitchells gathered their meager possessions, Morning Sky appeared with bundles of food and several tightly woven blankets. The nights are cold on the mesa, she explained, pressing the gifts into Sarah's hands. These will keep your daughters warm. Your generosity overwhelms me, Sarah said sincerely. How can I repay such kindness? The elder woman's weathered face softened. By remembering that goodness exists in all peoples, even when the world tells you otherwise. She glanced meaningfully toward Eagle Feather, who was helping Wilson secure cargo in the wagon. My grandson walks between worlds, belonging fully to neither. It is a lonely path, Sarah followed her gaze. He's an extraordinary man. Yes, Morning Sky agreed, like his father before him. She studied Sarah with perceptive eyes. The journey ahead has many branches, daughter of the East. Choose your Path with both heart and mind. Before Sarah could respond to this cryptic advice, Lillian rushed over, clutching the wooden horse Eagle Feather had carved. "Grandmother Morning Sky, look what Mr. Eagle Feather made for me." The elder smiled, running, her fingers over the carving. "He has his father's skill with a knife. Samuel Feather could make wood speak." She knelt to Lillian's level. "This is a special gift. The horse spirit brings freedom and carries prayers between earth and sky." Lillian nodded solemnly. "I'll keep it forever." As departure time approached, Swift River presented Sarah with a small pouch of coffee beans and dried meat. "For the journey," he explained, his earlier suspicion replaced by grudging respect. "Wilson knows the safe routes, but watch the sky. Storms come quickly this season." "Thank you for sheltering us," Sarah replied. "Your people have shown us kindness when we needed it most." Swift River's expression remained impassive. "Eagle Feather vouched for you. His word carries weight, despite—" He left the sentence unfinished, but Sarah understood the implications. Despite his mixed blood, despite the prejudices that existed on both sides of the cultural divide. "I won't forget what he did for us," she assured him. "What all of you have done." As Wilson made final preparations, Eagle Feather approached Sarah and her daughters. He carried a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "For your journey," he said, presenting it to Sarah. "And for what comes after?" She unwrapped the package to find a beautifully crafted knife with a bone handle and a leather sheath decorated with intricate beadwork. "James, I can't accept this. You've given too much already." "The knife was my father's," he explained. "A white woman alone needs protection. The blade will serve you well if you respect its power." The gift's significance wasn't lost on Sarah. This wasn't merely a tool but a symbol of trust, an heirloom passed to her safekeeping. "I'll treasure it," she promised, securing the sheath to her belt. Elizabeth stepped forward, extending her hand formally. "Thank you, Mr. Eagle Feather. We wouldn't have survived without you." Eagle Feather clasped her hand in the white man's customary greeting, honoring her emerging adulthood. "You have your mother's strength, Elizabeth Mitchell. Remember it when challenges come." Catherine, typically reserved with strangers, surprised everyone by impulsively embracing him. "I'll practice identifying the healing plants you showed me," she promised. Anne presented him with a small sketch she'd made of the trading post, her artistic talent capturing the settlement's unique character with remarkable accuracy. "So you won't forget us," she explained shyly. "Impossible," Eagle Feather assured her, carefully tucking the drawing into his shirt. Lillian, holding back tears, clutched her wooden horse. "Will we ever see you again?" Eagle Feather knelt to her level. "The future is unwritten, little one. But I will think of you when the stars appear each night." Finally, he turned to Sarah. Their eyes met, holding a conversation too complex for words. All the unspoken possibilities, the paths not taken, the boundaries uncrossed, everything hovered between them in that momentary silence. "Safe journey, Sarah Mitchell," he said simply. "Thank you for our lives," she responded, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Wilson called impatiently from the wagon. "Daylight's wasting. We need to make 10 Mile Creek." By nightfall, with final embraces for morning sky and reluctant waves to the gathered community members, the Mitchell family climbed aboard Wilson's wagon. As they departed, Sarah looked back to see Eagle Feather standing beside his grandmother, his tall figure gradually diminishing with distance, but remaining visible long after the trading post had faded from view. The journey to Santa Fe proceeded much as Wilson had predicted. They traveled steadily throughout the day, stopping only briefly to rest the mules and take simple meals of jerky and hardtack. The trader proved knowledgeable, if uncommunicative, choosing routes that avoided the worst terrain while remaining vigilant for any sign of threat. By nightfall, they reached a small creek where several cottonwood trees provided natural shelter. Wilson efficiently established camp, building a small fire and preparing a more substantial meal of beans and salt pork. Though not unfriendly, he maintained a professional distance, clearly viewing the Mitchells as cargo rather than companions. As they settled around the fire, Catherine broached the subject they'd all been avoiding. "Do you travel often between the Navajo lands and Santa Fe, Mr. Wilson?" The trader nodded, stoking the fire. "Every few weeks. Trade goods out, native crafts back. Been doing this route for 15 years. Then you must know James Eagle Feather." "Well," she continued cautiously. Wilson's expression shifted subtly. "Known him since he was a boy, running around his father's trading post. Sam Feather was a good man, fair trader, respected by whites and Navajo alike." He poked at the fire. "The son inherited his father's decency, though it's done him few favors." "What do you mean?" Elizabeth asked. Wilson sighed, glancing at Sarah, as if assessing how frank he should be. "Mixed blood's a heavy burden in these territories. Whites don't trust him because he's half Navajo. Some Navajo don't accept him because of his white father. Man without a country, so to speak." "Yet he risked everything to help us," Sarah observed. "That's his father in him," Wilson replied. "Sam Feather never could ignore folks in trouble, even when helping brought him grief." He studied Sarah with newfound interest. "Eagle Feather trading his father's watch and his horse for your passage. That's significant. Those were his only connections to his past." Sarah felt her daughter's eyes upon her, questions forming that she wasn't prepared to answer. "We're grateful for his sacrifice," she said simply. Wilson seemed about to comment further, but instead turned the conversation to practical matters. "Santa Fe's grown considerably since the railroad came through. Army maintains a strong presence. You'll want to report the massacre immediately. They'll investigate, maybe send an escort when you're ready to continue to Prescott." Later, as her daughters slept beneath Morning Sky's blankets, Sarah sat alone by the dying fire. The knife Eagle Feather had given her rested heavily against her hip, a tangible reminder of the man who had saved them, a man walking between worlds, belonging fully to neither, as his grandmother had described. For the first time since the attack, Sarah allowed herself to fully consider her situation. Her dreams of a secure future on her brother-in-law's homestead remained viable. Daniel would welcome them, help them establish a new life. The practical path forward was clear, yet something had shifted within her during those days of danger and survival. She had discovered reserves of strength and independence she hadn't known she possessed. The woman who had left Maryland seeking security was not the same woman now contemplating her future beneath a New Mexico sky. And then there was Eagle Feather, a man whose quiet dignity and profound integrity had affected her in ways she couldn't easily dismiss. Their connection had formed amid crisis, yet it felt more substantial than mere gratitude. What might have developed between them under different circumstances? What might still develop if she chose an unexpected path? Sarah touched the knife at her belt, remembering Eagle Feather's words. A white woman alone needs protection. But she wasn't entirely alone. She had her daughters, whose resilience through their ordeal had astonished her. Perhaps they were stronger together than she had realized. When sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's dreams were filled with diverging trails and choices hovering just beyond her reach. They arrived in Santa Fe late the following afternoon. The territorial capital bustled with activity. Merchants hawking goods from crowded stalls, soldiers in blue uniforms patrolling the streets, wagon trains preparing for journeys east and west. After the isolation of their journey, the noise and crowds felt overwhelming to the Mitchell women. Wilson guided them directly to the military headquarters, a sturdy adobe building flying the American flag. "Captain Ramos is a fair man," he told Sarah, He'll want a full account of the massacre. Tell him everything." He hesitated. But, Sarah prompted. "Just remember that army officers sometimes paint all natives with the same brush," Wilson cautioned. "Be clear about who helped you and who didn't." Inside, they were received by Captain Michael Ramos, a trim officer whose youthful face contrasted with eyes that had witnessed too much frontier violence. He listened intently as Sarah recounted the Apache attack, the death of their fellow travelers, and their rescue by James Eagle Feather. "You're extraordinarily fortunate, Mrs. Mitchell," Ramos commented when she finished. "Few survive such encounters." "It wasn't fortune, Captain," Sarah corrected firmly. "It was the courage and kindness of a man who risked his own safety to save us." Ramos nodded, making notes in a leather-bound ledger. "We've heard reports of Apache raiding parties targeting wagon trains. This fits their pattern." He looked up. "You're certain it was Apache, not Navajo or Comanche?" "Absolutely certain," Sarah stated, remembering her promise to Swift River. "The Navajo at the trading post treated us with nothing but kindness. Without James Eagle Feather and his people, we wouldn't have survived." The captain studied her thoughtfully. "Your account will be officially recorded. We'll dispatch a patrol to Shadow Rock Canyon to assess the situation and recover any remains for proper burial." He closed his ledger. "As for your immediate needs, there's a boarding house run by Mrs. Caldwell that accepts women in difficult circumstances. I'll arrange accommodation for you and your daughters until you decide your next steps." "Thank you, Captain," Sarah replied. "I also need to send word to my brother-in-law in Prescott, Daniel Mitchell. He's expecting us." "Of course. The military courier leaves for Arizona Territory twice weekly. I'll ensure your message is included." Ramos hesitated. "Mrs. Mitchell, if you're still intent on reaching Prescott, the Army sends supply wagons that route monthly. The next one departs in 2 weeks. It would be the safest option for your family. 2 weeks. Sarah repeated the time frame mentally, an unexpected wave of relief washing over her. 2 weeks to rest, to recover, to decide. Mrs. Caldwell's boarding house proved a sanctuary after their ordeal. The motherly widow provided clean rooms, regular meals, and practical assistance acquiring essential supplies. Within days, the Mitchell women had new clothing, proper baths, and the beginning of routine after weeks of uncertainty. The boarding house's other residents, mostly wives of soldiers stationed at distant outposts or women awaiting transportation to homesteads farther west, welcomed them with frontier hospitality. Their shared circumstances created instant camaraderie, and Sarah found unexpected comfort in these female friendships after so much isolation. Elizabeth quickly assumed a role helping Mrs. Caldwell manage the boarding house operations, her natural leadership blossoming in this structured environment. Catherine discovered Santa Fe's apothecary shop and spent hours discussing medicinal plants with its elderly proprietor, comparing his knowledge with what she'd learned from Eagle Feather. Anne sketched the adobe buildings and vibrant market scenes, while Lillian charmed everyone with her resilience and the wooden horse she proudly displayed to anyone who showed interest. A week into their stay, Sarah received a reply from her brother-in-law. Daniel expressed horror at their ordeal and profound relief at their survival. His letter urged them to continue to Prescott as soon as practical, promising a home and security upon their arrival. "We still have a week before the Army supply wagon departs," Elizabeth noted as they discussed the letter over breakfast. "Time enough to prepare properly." "Yes," Sarah agreed absently, her thoughts elsewhere. Later that day, as they walked through Santa Fe's Central Plaza, Lillian tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mother, will Mr. Eagle Feather ever visit us in Prescott?" The innocent question crystallized the uncertainty that had been growing in Sarah's mind. "I don't know, sweetheart. His home is with his people. But we're his people too, aren't we?" Lillian persisted with a child's simple logic. "He saved us. That makes us family." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought. She had no answer that would satisfy her youngest daughter or herself. That evening, after her daughters had retired, Sarah sat alone in Mrs. Caldwell's small garden. The knife-eagle feather had given her lay across her lap, its bone handle smooth beneath her fingers. The choices before her seemed simultaneously clear and impossibly complex. "Trouble sleeping?" Mrs. Caldwell asked, joining her on the bench. The older woman had proved remarkably perceptive during their stay, offering guidance without intrusion. "Troubled thinking," Sarah admitted. Mrs. Caldwell nodded knowingly. "You've been through more than most could bear. Yet here you sit, strong enough to worry about choices rather than mere survival. That's a victory of sorts." "I suppose it is," Sarah agreed. "But the path forward isn't as clear as I once thought." "Paths rarely are out here," Mrs. Caldwell observed. "The maps show routes between settlements, but they can't tell you which journey your heart needs to take." Sarah glanced at her sharply. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who stood at similar crossroads," the older woman replied with a gentle smile. "My Robert was a cattle driver when we met. My Boston family was scandalized when I chose a life that didn't include proper drawing rooms and calling cards." She gazed up at the star-filled sky. 28 years of frontier life, hard years, many of them, and never once did I regret choosing love over convention." "It's not that simple," Sarah protested weakly. "No, it never is," Mrs. Caldwell agreed, "especially with 4 daughters to consider. But children are remarkably adaptable and stronger than we often give them credit for." She patted Sarah's hand before rising. "Whatever you decide, make the choice that lets you sleep peacefully when you're my age." Alone again, Sarah weighed her options with new clarity. The practical choice, continuing to Prescott, offered security and conventional acceptance. Her daughters would have a proper home, educational opportunities, and the protection of family connections. It was the safe choice, the expected choice. The alternative meant embracing uncertainty. Returning to the trading post to Eagle Feather would mean navigating cultural boundaries few white women dared cross. It would mean potential ostracism from her own society and lingering suspicion from his. It would mean building something entirely new from the ashes of her former life. Yet when she imagined that path, uncertain as it was, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas died. Possibility. Not merely security or survival, but the chance for genuine connection, for a life defined by courage rather than convention. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Sarah reached a decision. Whether wisdom or folly, she couldn't yet say. But for the first time since leaving Maryland, the path ahead felt true to the woman she had become. "I've made a decision," Sarah announced the following morning as her daughters gathered for breakfast in Mrs. Caldwell's dining room. The quiet determination in her voice drew their immediate attention. Elizabeth, always the most perceptive, set down her coffee cup. "You're not planning to continue to Uncle Daniel's, are you?" Sarah took a deep breath. "No, at least not immediately." A mixture of emotions crossed her daughters' faces: surprise, confusion, and in Lillian's case, unmistakable hope. "We're going back to the trading post," Sarah continued, "to Eagle Feather." Silence greeted her declaration, each girl processing this unexpected announcement according to her nature. Catherine, practical as always, was the first to respond. "How will we get there? Wilson has already departed for his next trading run." Captain Ramos mentioned a missionary group heading toward Navajo territory tomorrow, Sarah explained. "Reverend Collins and his wife are establishing a school near the eastern reservation boundary. They've agreed to take us as far as Pine Creek Crossing. From there, we can hire a guide to the trading post." "Does this mean—" Anne hesitated, glancing at her sisters. "Are we going to live with the Navajo?" "Not exactly," Sarah replied, "but I need to speak with Eagle Feather before making permanent plans." He sacrificed his most valuable possessions to secure our passage to Santa Fe. At minimum, we owe him the opportunity to reclaim his property. This wasn't the full truth, and Elizabeth's raised eyebrows suggested she recognized the omission. But Sarah wasn't prepared to articulate emotions she herself was still reconciling. "What about Uncle Daniel?" Elizabeth asked. "He's expecting us." "I've written explaining our delay," Sarah assured her. "We're not abandoning that option entirely. We're simply exploring alternatives." Lillian clutched her wooden horse, her small face illuminated with joy. "We'll see Mr. Eagle Feather again, and Grandmother Morning Sky." "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah confirmed, her resolve strengthening at her youngest daughter's evident happiness. "Well," Catherine said pragmatically, "I did want to learn more about those medicinal plants Morning Sky was showing me." Anne nodded slowly. "I have so many sketches I wanted to finish at the trading post." All eyes turned to Elizabeth, whose opinion carried significant weight among the sisters. The eldest Mitchell daughter maintained a thoughtful silence, studying her mother with an intensity that belied her 15 years. "This isn't just about repaying a debt, is it?" she finally asked. Sarah met her daughter's gaze directly. "No, it isn't." Elizabeth nodded, seemingly satisfied with this honest admission. "Then I support your decision, Mother. We all should." The matter settled with surprising ease. They spent the day preparing for departure. Mrs. Caldwell, though clearly surprised by Sarah's choice, provided practical assistance without judgment. "The frontier makes unconventional women of us all," she remarked as she helped Sarah pack. "Your James Eagle Feather seems an exceptional man from everything you've told me." "He is," Sarah acknowledged, "though I'm not certain what he'll make of our return." "Only one way to find out," Mrs. Caldwell said with a knowing smile. "Courage doesn't always roar, my dear. Sometimes it's the quiet voice saying, 'I'll try again tomorrow.'" Captain Ramos proved less understanding when Sarah informed him of their change in plans. "Mrs. Mitchell, I strongly advise against this course of action," he cautioned, his official demeanor slipping to reveal genuine concern. "The territories between here and the Navajo lands are unpredictable. The massacre you survived wasn't an isolated incident." "I appreciate your concern, Captain," Sarah replied firmly, "but Reverend Collins assures me they travel this route regularly without incident." Ramos frowned. "Missionaries are afforded certain considerations by the tribes. Civilian women and children without military escort are viewed differently." He sighed, recognizing her determination. "At least allow me to provide you with additional ammunition for your revolver, and I insist you accept this letter of safe passage should you encounter any military patrols." The following dawn found the Mitchell family joining Reverend Collins's modest caravan. The missionary and his wife, earnest, educationally minded Bostonians, welcomed them warmly, though with evident curiosity about their unusual destination. "The Navajo are remarkably receptive to educational initiatives," Reverend Collins explained, as their wagons creaked westward. "Unlike some tribes, they recognize the value of incorporating certain aspects of our culture while maintaining their own traditions." Mrs. Collins, a former schoolteacher with kind eyes and practical hands, took an immediate liking to the Mitchell girls. "You've raised remarkable daughters, Mrs. Mitchell. Such resilience after all you've endured." "They've surprised even me," Sarah admitted, watching Elizabeth help the wagon driver negotiate a difficult stretch of road, while Catherine engaged the missionary's assistant in a detailed discussion of native botany. "Sometimes I think children reveal their true nature during hardship rather than ease." "A profound observation," Mrs. Collins agreed. "And what of this James Eagle Feather? Reverend Collins mentioned he's of mixed heritage." "Yes," Sarah confirmed, uncertain how much to reveal about their relationship. "His father was a respected trader, his mother Navajo. He bridges both worlds with remarkable grace, despite the challenges. Such individuals are invaluable to our work," Mrs. Collins noted. Perhaps he might consider assisting at our school. We could offer fair compensation. Sarah smiled non-committally, recognizing the well-intentioned but presumptuous nature of the suggestion. Eagle Feather's path was his to determine, not hers to negotiate. The journey to Pine Creek Crossing proceeded without incident. True to Captain Ramos's assessment, the missionaries' wagon received respectful distance from the occasional native hunting parties they encountered. On the third day, they arrived at the small settlement that marked the boundary between territories. Little more than a trading post, a livery stable, and a few scattered homesteads. "This is where we must part ways," Reverend Collins announced. "We continue north from here, while your destination lies westward." The missionary provided Sarah with a letter of introduction to Pine Creek Trading Post's proprietor, who could arrange their final transportation. His wife embraced each Mitchell daughter warmly, extracting promises of letters detailing their adventures. "Your path is unconventional," Mrs. Collins whispered to Sarah during their farewell, "but I sense it's right for you. Trust that instinct." Pine Creek Trading Post proved considerably rougher than Santa Fe's civilized establishments. A weathered log structure perched on the banks of a seasonal creek serving trappers, prospectors, and the occasional government surveyor. Its proprietor, Jeremiah Hawkins, greeted Sarah's request with undisguised skepticism. "You want passage to Swift River's trading post," he repeated incredulously. "Ma'am, that's 3 days through territory most white folks avoid deliberately." "We've traveled there before," Sarah stated firmly, "and we have friends among the Navajo." Hawkins raised bushy eyebrows. "Friends, is it? Well, that's a first." He studied the Mitchell women thoughtfully. "I've got a supply wagon heading that direction in 2 days. Driver's a half Cherokee named Dawson, who knows those trails better than most. He can take you, but it'll cost." Sarah produced the funds Mrs. Caldwell had discreetly pressed upon her at their parting. "Will this suffice?" Hawkins counted the money with practiced efficiency. "It'll do. Wagon leaves at first light the day after tomorrow. I can offer basic accommodations until then. Nothing fancy, mind you." Their quarters, a small back room with straw-filled mattresses, were indeed rudimentary compared to Mrs. Caldwell's comfortable boarding house. But after their experiences at Shadow Rock Canyon, the Mitchell women found little cause for complaint. They spent the intervening day restocking supplies and gathering information about conditions ahead. "Unusual drought this season," reported Dawson, the taciturn driver who would guide their final leg. His weathered face and silver-streaked hair suggested a man well acquainted with frontier hardships. "Might need to take the northern route if the usual waterholes are dry." "Will that delay us significantly?" Sarah asked. Dawson shrugged. "Day, maybe 2. Better than dying of thirst." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but Hawkins mentioned you're heading to Swift River's post on account of friends. Would one of those friends happen to be James Eagle Feather?" Sarah tensed. "You know him." "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper," Dawson replied, his expression softening. "His father pulled me through a nasty fever when no one else would touch a Cherokee. Good folks, the Feathers." He nodded decisively. "We'll get you there safe. Any friend of Eagle Feathers is worth the extra effort." They departed as promised at dawn. Dawson's wagon, loaded with trade goods and provisions, offered limited comfort but reliable transportation. The girls, having developed considerable stamina during their ordeal, alternated between riding and walking alongside. As the landscape gradually shifted from scattered pine forests to the open expanses of the high desert, Sarah found her anticipation growing. What would Eagle Feather think of their return? What expectations had she created with this impulsive decision? The practical concerns she'd temporarily shelved in Santa Fe resurfaced with mounting urgency. On their second night, camped beneath a natural rock formation that provided shelter from the wind, Sarah confided her uncertainties to Elizabeth. "Have I made a terrible mistake?" she whispered as they sat apart from the others. "Dragging you girls back into this wilderness based on feelings I can barely define." Elizabeth, who had inherited her father's thoughtful nature alongside her mother's determination, considered the question seriously. "Do you remember what father used to say about crossroads?" Sarah smiled at the unexpected reference. "That the path that frightens you most is usually the one you need to take." "Exactly," Elizabeth confirmed. "Uncle Daniel and Arizona represent safety and convention. Eagle Feather and the Navajo lands represent uncertainty, but also possibility." She took her mother's hand. "You taught us courage during the massacre and its aftermath. Now you're teaching us to honor our hearts alongside our heads. That's not a mistake." The wisdom in her daughter's response brought tears to Sarah's eyes. When had Elizabeth transformed from a child into this insightful young woman? "When did you become so wise?" she asked softly. Elizabeth smiled. "Probably around the time you pulled me under that overturned wagon and showed me how to survive impossible odds." Their journey's final day brought them through increasingly familiar territory. Lillian recognized landmarks from their previous passage, excitedly pointing out the mesa where Swift River's trading post nestled. By late afternoon, Dawson confirmed they would reach their destination before nightfall. "Oh, looks like you've got a welcoming committee," he observed, as they crested the final ridge overlooking the settlement. A small group had gathered in the central courtyard, alerted to their approach by the distant dust of their wagon. Sarah's heart raced as she strained to identify the figures below. She recognized Swift River's distinctive silver-streaked hair and Morning Sky's dignified posture, but her eyes searched for one figure in particular. "Is he there?" Catherine asked, echoing her mother's unspoken question. "I can't tell," Sarah admitted, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. As they approached the final bend in the trail, a lone rider appeared from a side canyon, moving rapidly. To intercept their wagon, Sarah recognized Eagle Feather's distinctive painted mare, the same horse he had traded for their passage to Santa Fe. "He got his horse back!" Lillian exclaimed joyfully. Dawson slowed the wagon as Eagle Feather approached. For a moment he seemed unable to believe the evidence before his eyes. Then his normally impassive expression transformed into undisguised wonder. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, her name itself a question. "James Eagle Feather," she replied, a smile breaking through her nervousness. He guided his horse alongside the wagon, studying each Mitchell face as if confirming a dream's reality. "You've returned. All of you." "We have unfinished business," Sarah explained, suddenly conscious of Dawson's curious observation and her daughter's attentive presence. Understanding flickered in Eagle Feather's eyes. "Indeed we do." He turned to Dawson with newfound animation. "The trading post is prepared to receive your goods. Swift River mentioned you bring the medicine shipment." "That and more," Dawson confirmed, grinning, "including some unexpected passengers." Eagle Feather rode ahead to announce their arrival, his straight-back posture radiating an energy Sarah hadn't witnessed during their previous encounter. By the time their wagon reached the settlement, the entire community had assembled to greet them. Morning Sky stepped forward, her weathered face creasing with genuine pleasure. "The Mitchell women returned to us," she announced in English for their benefit. "Our circle is completed." Swift River, though more reserved, inclined his head respectfully. "You honor us with your trust, Sarah Mitchell. Few white women choose our company when safer paths exist." "Safety isn't always measured by familiar surroundings," Sarah replied, the words coming naturally despite her careful rehearsal of this moment. "Sometimes it's found in the character of those who stand beside you." Her gaze shifted to Eagle Feather, who stood slightly apart, his eyes never leaving her face. The connection between them, tentative during their first encounter, had strengthened in absence, like metal tempered by fire. While the trading post community helped Dawson unload his wagon, Morning Sky ushered the Mitchell women to her hogan. "You will stay with me tonight," she declared. "Tomorrow we will speak of what comes next." The girls, exhausted yet exhilarated by their arrival, quickly reintegrated into the rhythms of the settlement. Elizabeth joined several young women preparing the evening meal. Catherine resumed her study of medicinal plants with Morning Sky. Anne retrieved her sketchbook, eager to capture the sunset's effect on the mesa. Lillian disappeared with several Navajo children who remembered her from their previous visit, her laughter drifting across the compound. Left momentarily alone, Sarah stepped outside Morning Sky's dwelling. Eagle Feather waited nearby, respectful of her need to settle her family, but clearly eager for private conversation. "Walk with me," he suggested, gesturing toward a narrow trail that wound behind the settlement. They followed the path in comfortable silence until reaching a natural outcropping that offered views across the valley. The setting sun painted the landscape in gold and crimson, transforming the harsh terrain into breathtaking beauty. "I never expected to see you again," Eagle Feather finally said, his voice quiet but intense. "When Wilson brought news that you'd safely reached Santa Fe, I believed your journey would continue eastward without looking back." "That was the logical path," Sarah acknowledged. "My brother-in-law still expects us in Arizona. Captain Ramos arranged a military escort. Everything was prepared for our departure. Yet you returned." The simple statement contained a universe of questions. Sarah turned to face him directly. "I realized something in Santa Fe, something I couldn't ignore, no matter how practical the alternative seemed." "What realization?" Eagle Feather asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. "That sometimes survival demands more than merely staying alive," Sarah replied. "Sometimes it requires the courage to follow an unexpected path." She took a deep breath. "I came back because our story didn't feel complete, because my daughters and I found something here we didn't anticipate. Not just safety or kindness, but possibility." Eagle Feather stepped closer, the last sunlight illuminating the hope and uncertainty in his expression. "What possibility do you see, Sarah Mitchell?" "The possibility of building something new," she said simply. "Something that honors both our pasts while creating a shared future. I don't know exactly what shape it might take, but I know it deserves exploration." He reached slowly for her hand, giving her every opportunity to withdraw. When their fingers intertwined, the contact felt simultaneously revolutionary and inevitable. "My grandmother has a saying," Eagle Feather murmured. "When two rivers join, they create a new path together, while carrying the essence of their sources." "Your grandmother is very wise," Sarah smiled, "though I imagine she'll have practical questions about how a Maryland widow and her 4 daughters might fit into this community." "She already considers you family," Eagle Feather assured her. "As for practical matters, my father's trading post still stands near the southern boundary. It needs renovation, but with effort, it could serve as both home and livelihood." He hesitated before adding, "If that appeals to you." The invitation hovered between them, tentative yet profoundly significant. Not merely shelter, but partnership. Not merely survival, but shared purpose. "I would need to learn much," Sarah acknowledged, "about trading, about your mother's people, about building bridges between worlds." "As would I," Eagle Feather replied, "about raising daughters, about Eastern perspectives, about creating a household that honors multiple traditions." His eyes held hers steadily. "But I believe some lessons are worth the learning, Sarah Mitchell." As darkness settled over the mesa and distant cooking fires beckoned them back to the community, Sarah recognized the crossroads for what it was. Not an ending, but a beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their unlikely bond forged in tragedy, but sustained by something far more powerful, the courage to imagine a future beyond the boundaries others had defined. "Yes," she agreed simply, her hand tightening around his. "Some lessons are definitely worth learning." 1 year later, the trading post at Eagle Creek bore little resemblance to the abandoned structure Sarah had first glimpsed 12 months earlier. What had been a weathered shell of Samuel Feather's original establishment now stood renewed, its log walls reinforced, its roof sound, its surroundings transformed from neglect to purposeful industry. Sarah paused in hanging, freshly laundered linens to observe the activity around her. Near the corral, Eagle Feather and Elizabeth worked with a spirited young stallion, their confident movements reflecting a partnership developed through months of shared labor. Catherine tended her meticulously organized herb garden, where traditional Navajo medicinal plants grew alongside Eastern varieties she'd special ordered from Santa Fe. Anne sat beneath a cottonwood tree, sketching a group of Navajo children listening to Lillian's animated storytelling, the youngest Mitchell daughter now switching effortlessly between English and Navajo phrases. A year ago, Sarah could never have imagined this life. Now, she couldn't imagine any other. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention to the trail leading from the main reservation. Swift River appeared, accompanied by 2 young Navajo men and a wagon loaded with wool blankets, silver jewelry, and pottery. "James Eagle Feather," Swift River called. "The trading caravan departs for Santa Fe tomorrow at dawn. Are you prepared?" Eagle Feather acknowledged the headman with a raised hand before turning to complete his instructions to Elizabeth about the stallion. Their monthly trading expeditions had become the economic foundation of their unusual household, Eagle Feather transporting Navajo crafts to Santa Fe and returning with goods from the East that benefited both cultures. Sarah welcomed Swift River with the traditional Navajo greeting morning sky had taught her. "The coffee is hot, and Catherine just finished baking bread," she added in English. Swift River's initial suspicion of their unconventional arrangement had gradually yielded to grudging respect and eventually genuine appreciation. "My wife sends these," he said, producing a package of dried berries and pine nuts. "She says Lillian has acquired a taste for them." "Her kindness is appreciated," Sarah replied, accepting the gift. "Will you join us for the midday meal?" "Briefly," Swift River agreed. "We must return before nightfall. The tribal council meets tomorrow regarding the government agent's new proposals." The mention of government business cast a momentary shadow across Sarah's thoughts. The past year had brought increasing pressure from territorial authorities attempting to restrict native movements and cultural practices. Eagle Feather's unique position, officially registered as a U.S. citizen through his father while maintaining deep connections to his Navajo heritage, had proven invaluable in navigating these complexities. Inside the trading post's main room, evidence of their blended existence surrounded them. The trading counter Samuel Feather had built still dominated one wall, now restored and expanded. Navajo rugs warmed the plank floors, while Maryland-made curtains framed the windows. Sarah's sewing machine, a miraculous arrival via freight wagon, 3 months earlier, occupied one corner while traditional clay cooking vessels lined the hearth. Most revealing was the bookshelf Eagle Feather had crafted from local pine. Alongside Samuel Feather's Bible and survey maps rested volumes of poetry that Daniel had sent from Arizona, botanical references Catherine studied religiously, and illustrated children's stories Morning Sky had helped translate into Navajo for the reservation's developing school. As Swift River sampled Catherine's fresh bread and discussed trading prospects with Eagle Feather, Sarah reflected on the journey that had led them here. The first months had been the hardest, rebuilding the trading post, establishing their unusual household, negotiating their place between cultures that historically viewed each other with suspicion. Her brother Daniel, had initially responded to news of her decision with dismay bordering on outrage. His letters expressed everything from concern for her safety to accusations of mental instability brought on by trauma. Only Elizabeth's careful correspondence detailing their progress, along with Sarah's firm but loving responses, had gradually convinced him to accept, if not entirely understand, her choice. Their most significant breakthrough had come 6 months earlier, when Daniel finally visited, arriving with a wagon loaded with family possessions he'd stored after selling their Maryland home. His initial stiffness toward Eagle Feather had dissolved during a 3-day hunting expedition, where they'd been forced to rely on each other's skills to survive an unexpected blizzard. By his departure, Daniel had extended an invitation for the entire family to visit his Prescott homestead, a recognition of their union that had meant more than any official documentation. After Swift River's departure, Eagle Feather found Sarah standing at the edge of their property, gazing toward the distant mountains. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, a gesture that had become natural over the months of their shared life. "What thoughts travel behind your eyes?" he asked softly. "I was remembering the day we met," Sarah replied. "That moment when our eyes locked across Shadow Rock Canyon. You could have looked away. You could have left us to our fate, and you could have continued to Santa Fe, to the safety of your brother's home," he countered. "Instead, you returned to a man and a people you barely knew." Sarah turned in his embrace to face him. Sometimes the heart recognizes its home before the mind understands the journey. Eagle Feather smiled, touching his forehead to hers in the intimate gesture they had made their own. "Morning sky says we were called to each other across the darkness, two halves of a story seeking completion. Is that what we are? A completed story?" "No," Eagle Feather replied, looking toward their daughters, Mitchell and Navajo children, playing together beneath the vast western sky. "We are just beginning." That evening, as stars appeared above their home, a home that existed in the space between cultures, between traditions, between worlds, Sarah reflected on the unlikely path that had led them here. A massacre that should have ended her family's story had instead opened a new chapter. A man caught between two worlds had helped her find her place in both. As Lillian placed Eagle Feather's carved horse on a special shelf before bed, a treasure, now joined by other symbols of their blended life, Sarah knew with quiet certainty that they had created something rare and precious from the aftermath of tragedy. Not just survival, but a new kind of belonging. From the ashes of what was lost, they had built what Eagle Feather's people called Hojo, beauty, harmony, and right relation. Not perfect, not without challenges, but authentic and alive with possibility. Their story, like the trading post that sheltered them, stood as testimony to the crossing of boundaries and the unexpected grace that sometimes waited on the other side. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.